Napoleon's Last Stand. The Fall of an Empire and the Promise of a Return. April 1814. The skies over Europe seemed to have cleared after a decade engulfed in the smoke of war. For 10 long years, a single man had shaped the destiny of the entire continent. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French. From an obscure Corsican artillery officer through his extraordinary military genius and boundless ambition, he had lifted France from the brink of revolutionary chaos to become a mighty empire, its power stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to the vast plains of Poland. The kings and emperors of Europe's oldest dynasties had been forced to bow before him. However, that same ambition was the very seed of his downfall. The disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812 had incinerated his legendary Grande Armée in the harsh winter. From then on, fortune abandoned Napoleon. A massive grand coalition comprising Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia was formed by his sworn enemies, pressing him from all sides. Finally, after bloody battles, they marched into Paris. Forced by his own marshals, Napoleon had to accept unconditional abdication. He was exiled to Elba, a tiny island off the coast of Italy, while the House of Bourbon was restored to the French throne under the rule of the obese and indecisive King Louis XVIII. On Elba, Napoleon was not a prisoner in chains, but a king without a kingdom. Yet his mind never rested. Rumors and reports from the continent continuously reached him. He heard that the French people, the soldiers and peasants who had once fought under his tricolor flag, were not fond of the new monarchy. They despised the extravagance, stagnation, and condescending attitude of the old aristocracy who had returned after Napoleon's fall. It was the arrogance and injustice of this very class that had ignited the French Revolution 25 years earlier. Simultaneously, at the Congress of Vienna, where the victorious powers were meeting to redraw the map of Europe, cracks began to appear. They fell into petty disputes over territory and power, over the future of Poland and Saxony. His enemies were divided. Napoleon recognized his opportunity. He believed his return was not just a personal gamble, but the will of the French nation. The 100 Days, the flight of the eagle. After nearly 10 months in exile, on February 26, 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte escaped from Elba. He decided to act. With a small, loyal force, he landed on French soil. His return, known as the Flight of the Eagle, is one of the most dramatic chapters in history. King Louis XVIII sent Marshal Ney, one of Napoleon's most talented and bravest former generals, who had sworn to bring Napoleon back to Paris in an iron cage to intercept him. But when faced with his former emperor, who calmly opened his coat to expose his chest and said, "Soldiers, if there is one among you who would kill his emperor, here I am." Ney and his entire army could not resist. They knelt and hailed, "Long live the emperor." Napoleon's return was like a storm. Wherever he went, troops sent to capture him turned to join his ranks. On March 20th, he entered Paris without a single shot being fired. King Louis XVIII had already fled in haste. The period of the 100 Days had begun. But in Vienna, the news of Napoleon's return extinguished all disagreements. The coalition powers immediately set aside their differences. They jointly declared Napoleon an outlaw, a disturber of world peace. They pledged to mobilize their full military forces to destroy him once and for all. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from all over Europe began to mobilize, preparing for a full-scale invasion of France. Napoleon understood he was in a race against time. He could not wait for the entire massive force of the coalition to unite. He was forced to act with daring and audacity. His plan was to launch a preemptive strike, to win a quick and decisive victory, to force the coalition to the negotiating table. He targeted the two nearest and most vulnerable coalition armies, the Prussian army of Field Marshal Gebhard von Blücher and the Anglo-Allied army of the Duke of Wellington, both of which were stationed in Belgium. The Waterloo campaign begins. Divide and conquer. Napoleon's army, reassembled with incredible speed, marched before the coalition. But he knew that if Blücher's and Wellington's forces combined, he would be completely outnumbered. Therefore, his core strategy was to keep them separated, using the mobility of his army to defeat each enemy in turn. On June 15, 1815, Napoleon launched a surprise invasion of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which then included Belgium. His army crossed the border near Charleroi, successfully driving a wedge between the two coalition armies, just as planned. On June 16th, Napoleon divided his forces. He gave the left wing to Marshal Ney with the mission to capture the strategic crossroads at Quatre Bras, blocking Wellington. At the same time, he led the main force to attack Blücher's Prussians at the village of Ligny. At Quatre Bras, Ney hesitated. He encountered Wellington's troops, who were still in a state of confusion and assembling hastily. However, Ney's indecisiveness allowed the Allied forces to consolidate their position. Throughout the day, the Allied army held its line against a series of fierce French attacks, successfully pinning down a large part of Napoleon's army. Meanwhile, at Ligny, a fierce and bloody battle unfolded. Napoleon launched an all-out assault on the Prussians. The fighting was brutal in every street, every house of the village. In the end, the French were victorious. The 72-year-old veteran Blücher personally led a cavalry charge. His horse was shot from under him, and he was pinned beneath it, nearly captured alive. Fortunately, he was rescued in the darkness. The Prussian army was forced to retreat, but crucially, they were not routed. Napoleon made a critical error. He tasked his right wing, under the command of Marshal Emmanuel de Grouchy, with pursuing and destroying the Prussian remnants. But his orders were ambiguous. Meanwhile, he turned his attention to his main target, Wellington's army. The British general only received news of Blücher's defeat the following morning. He immediately ordered a retreat northwards, under a torrential summer rain that turned every road into a muddy quagmire. He chose a defensive position he had previously scouted, a low ridge 8 miles south of Brussels, near a small village named Waterloo. Here, he received a crucial message from Blücher. Despite the defeat at Ligny, the brave old Prussian general promised that he would march to Wellington's aid with at least 3 army corps. With this promise of reinforcement, Wellington decided to stop, make his stand, and prepare for a decisive battle. The fateful battlefield. Wellington chose his battlefield with extreme care. His army was positioned along a ridge, the Mont Saint-Jean Road. This position allowed the majority of his soldiers to shelter behind the reverse slope of the hill, hidden from the view and fire of the French artillery. He turned 3 farm compounds into forward bastions. The right flank was protected by the fortified chateau and farm of Hougoumont. The center was anchored by the farm of La Haye-Sainte, and the left flank was shielded by the farms of Papelotte and La Haye. All 3 were reinforced and garrisoned by elite troops. Wellington's army needed every advantage it could get. In terms of numbers, the two sides were relatively equal, around 70,000 men each. But Wellington's army was a motley collection of British, Dutch, Belgian, and soldiers from various German states, many of whom were raw recruits who had never seen battle. They would have to face the battle-hardened, veteran French army, fighting under the direct command of their legendary emperor. Their task was clear: to hold their ground at all costs until the Prussian reinforcements arrived. If not, both the battle and the war would be lost. Sunday, June 18th, 1815. The Battle of Waterloo. The dawn on Sunday was bright and clear. The ground was still waterlogged from the heavy rain of the previous night. Napoleon, confident of victory, had ordered Grouchy to continue hunting the Prussians and prevent them from joining Wellington. But Grouchy had been deceived. He was engaging the rear guard of a single Prussian corps, while the three main Prussian corps had skillfully evaded him and were marching at full speed to relieve Wellington. At Waterloo, Napoleon delayed his attack until nearly noon. He wanted to wait for the ground to dry, making it easier for his artillery and cavalry to maneuver. But these precious wasted hours would later prove fatal. The battle began around 11 a.m. Napoleon ordered a diversionary attack on Wellington's right flank at Hougoumont, led by his brother Jerome Bonaparte. He hoped Wellington would commit his reserves there, weakening the center where the main attack was planned. But at Hougoumont, the British and German troops resisted with extraordinary tenacity. The fight for the farm turned into a brutal battle of attrition. When a group of French soldiers broke through the main gate, a handful of British Coldstream Guards bravely forced the gate shut, trapping the intruders inside and killing them all. Wellington would later call the closing of the gate at Hougoumont the decisive moment of the battle. Around noon, a grand battery of 80 French cannons began a massive bombardment of the Allied lines. Most of Wellington's soldiers were safe behind the ridge, but the cannonballs still tore through their positions, creating bloody gaps in the ranks. At 1:30 p.m., Napoleon launched his main assault. 4 infantry divisions under the command of d'Erlon advanced to attack the Allied center left. Tens of thousands of French soldiers, arranged in dense columns, marched forward to the sound of beating drums. They were met by disciplined volleys of musket fire from the British infantry. Immediately after, British heavy cavalry, including the Household and Union brigades, launched a devastating charge. The French attack was completely shattered. Thousands of d'Erlon's men were slaughtered under the flashing sabers. 2 prestigious French Imperial Eagles were captured. But the British cavalry, spurred on by their easy victory, lost control and charged too deep into the French lines. They became scattered, their horses exhausted, and then they were counterattacked by French cavalry and suffered extremely heavy losses. Among the fallen was General William Ponsonby, commander of the Union Brigade. Around 4 p.m., Marshal Ney, commanding the Central Front, made another disastrous mistake. He mistook the movement of Allied wounded to the rear as a sign of a general retreat. To seize the opportunity, he led a massive cavalry charge without the support of infantry or artillery. Thousands of armored cuirassiers gallantly charged up the slope, but the Allied army was ready. The British and German infantry quickly formed solid square formations, their bayonets bristling outwards like steel porcupines. The French cavalry could not break into these formations. They could only circle them helplessly, taking fire at point-blank range until they were forced to retreat or were shot from their saddles. This magnificent but futile charge consumed a large portion of Napoleon's elite cavalry. Meanwhile, to the east, Blücher's Prussians had appeared. They attacked the village of Plancenoit, located on the French right flank. Their arrival seriously threatened Napoleon's line of retreat and forced him to divert his precious young guard units to retake the village, starting another fierce battle within the main battle. Around 6 p.m., French infantry finally captured the farm of La Haye-Sainte in the center of the battlefield after a heroic defense. This created a dangerous hole in Wellington's line. The French could now bring up artillery at close range and brutally bombard the Allied formations. Wellington's line was on the verge of collapse. He remarked that if the Prussians did not come soon, his men would be destroyed where they stood. But Napoleon's situation was no better. The Prussians were drawing ever closer. He was running out of troops to both fight off the Prussians and deliver the final blow to Wellington. He decided to play his last card. He unleashed his finest troops, the soldiers who had never known defeat, the elite Imperial Guard. Around 7:30 p.m., 3,000 veteran Imperial Guardsmen, the pride of France, marched past their emperor and across the corpse-strewn battlefield towards the Allied center. Wellington had been waiting for this moment. He had his redcoats lie down to avoid artillery fire. As the French Guard reached the crest of the ridge, Wellington gave the order. "Now, Maitland, now's your time. Up, Guards, and at 'em." Over 1,000 British foot guards stood up and unleashed a devastating musket volley into the Guards' ranks at a range of only a few dozen yards. Stunned by the unexpected fire, the Guards' column faltered. As the Allied troops fixed bayonets and prepared to charge, the unthinkable happened. The Imperial Guard, for the first time in its history, wavered and then began to retreat. The cry, "La garde recule!" The Guard retreats, spread like an electric shock through the French ranks. Wellington, sensing victory was near, waved his hat and ordered a general advance along the entire front. At the same time, the Prussians recaptured Plancenoit. Attacked from the front by Wellington and enveloped from the flank by the Prussians, the French army completely disintegrated. Panic erupted, and the entire army began to flee in disarray. Only the battalions of Napoleon's Old Guard maintained their discipline, forming squares to conduct a heroic but suicidal rearguard action, allowing their emperor time to escape. Napoleon himself was forced to abandon his carriage and flee the relentless pursuit of the Prussian cavalry. The aftermath. The end of an era. The battle was decided. The Duke of Wellington and Field Marshal Blücher met and celebrated their victory at Napoleon's former headquarters, an inn named La Belle Alliance, the Beautiful Alliance. The Battle of Waterloo was, in Wellington's own words, the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life. It was also one of the bloodiest battles of the era. In a single day of fighting, approximately 50,000 men were killed or wounded, with about 23,000 from the coalition and 27,000 from the French army. Due to a lack of medical care, thousands of wounded were left on the battlefield for days afterward. Napoleon was utterly defeated. He could not raise another army. He surrendered to the British. This time, they would not make the same mistake. He was exiled a second time to St. Helena, a tiny, remote, and desolate island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. This time, there was no escape. Napoleon died 6 years later. Waterloo marked the end of the Napoleonic Wars and ushered in a period of relatively long-lasting peace in Europe. There would be no major war between the great powers for another 40 years, and the British Army would not fight on the European continent again for another 100 years, until the fateful summer of 1914. 40 years after the battle, the pioneers of photography captured these rare images. They were veterans of Napoleon's great army, now all old men in their 70s and 80s. Among them were Sergeant Toria of the Imperial Guard, M. Moret of the 2nd Hussars, and M. Verlinde of the 2nd Lancers. In their aged faces and worn-out uniforms, one can still see the shadow of a heroic and tragic era that had passed into history forever. Thanks for watching.